Louder, louder, better.
Okay, so we're about to start, and this is a announced meeting of the council. This is not on.
The green light's on.
I said, thank you for coming. This is a joint meeting of the council and the planning commission. And so we're going to take roll call to start with. Then I'll have a few introductory comments. And then I'll introduce our responsible people from the planning department to talk in detail about what we're here to do, where we are, and things like that. But I do appreciate y'all coming. Okay, you want to take roll call, Anthony?
Yes, sir. Councilmember DeGolia, I haven't seen him. Councilmember Holland? No. Vice Mayor Hawkins? Okay. Councilmember Lewis? And Mayor Whitmer? Okay.
I'm here too.
And I'll just ask if we have any of our planning commissioners in the building. Oh, Planning Commissioner Polito. And I don't see anyone else. And if I see him, I'll announce him during the meeting.
Okay, so as you probably figured out, I'm have the honor of being mayor this year. My name is Bill Whitmer. You can get a hold of me through the town website. I have all my information out there, including my cell phone. If you feel like it's an emergency, you need to call me. As many of you know, we submitted our first real housing statement back to the state, HCD, on the 31st of January. We had submitted one before, we got some comments back, and then we had an obligation to get something in by the 31st of January. We did that, and the state got back with us and told us that, well, thank you very much, but you're not substantially complete. And they want us to give us some more information, and they detailed what that information was on April 4th. And if you've been following this, which I hope many of you have, you know, there have been articles in the paper, especially the local paper, but all the papers with regards to what the Housing Commission told us. And then even, you know, more recently, the grand jury decided they were going to jump in and also throw a little, push a little dirt around, which we'll be responding to shortly. However, so we've got more work to do. And one of the things that the Housing Commission, HCD, asked us to do was make sure that we're reaching out. So as you know, we've had lots of public meetings on this that are all previously announced. However, we had a meeting in the park, and we're having meetings such as this. So there probably will be more to come. But you know, this is one of the things that we wanted to do, to reach out to y'all and get your input on several things and let you know where we are. We're not going to, as many people have written to me, we're not revealing anything new. We're not going to show, you know, we haven't done any notification because there's no notification to do. In addition to having meetings and continuing to work on where we are, we have to do a CEQA analysis on our final compliant report. And so during this time, before we make the next submittal, we will be also doing that again. As you know, our original submittal included several things: housing at Menlo School, housing at a substantial amount of housing at Menlo College. Hopefully they'll get the funding to at least get that started. And in between the two of those, it's 80 new homes for people. There's work going on right now to try and get something at Sacred Heart, maybe at the Circus Club, but those discussions are continuing on. We've talked to the public schools. They weren't really interested in doing anything at this point in time. However, continued to point us out that, yes, their teachers need housing in the area. So anyway, also in our original submittal, we also submitted a small development over at 23 Oakwood, which is just off of Selby Lane. So that's what's there. But the majority of what we submitted was ADUs. And so the state has questioned what we're doing with regards to ADUs. And, of course, if you build an ADU, then you have the responsibility or you have the right to say, hey, I'll decide who I want rented here. So in response to the concerns from the HCD that maybe, we'll just be very exclusionary with regards to that, we've enlisted the help of HIP Housing, as well as working with Stanford University and Menlo College to see if we can get candidates to possibly rent some of our apartments. Also, there's been a letter that's been sent out to all of you. Please fill it out and send it in. If you have an ADU, it asks the question, are you renting it and what's the income level that you're renting it? It doesn't ask anything more than that. It gives you categories and just apply to that. So we can go ahead and get back with HCD to say, because I believe, and I think many of you here believe, yes, we have a lot of ADUs in town. We just don't know about it. And they're all being rented, or a lot of them are being rented, or people are having somebody stay in their house in a JADU. So we need to know those things so we can report that. And then it makes our analysis and our submittal, like we just had already done, more realistic. We can justify that. So tonight, the planning department and the planning team here is going to discuss the recent April 4th letter from HCD. A lot of the things that they wanted was analysis. They'll go over that analysis, talk about maybe some options that the state is asking us to look at. The workshop is more of a presentation, okay, but we do want your input. So right now, I'd like to stop talking, okay, and turn it over to Jeff Bradley, who is the principal with M Group, who is our planning department. And he's going to go walk through a presentation with you. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Widmer, Mayor Widmer, sorry. If you're sitting next to a chair that's empty and you're not saving it for someone, please raise your hand. We got one over here, one over here. I hate for people to come and say we didn't have enough chairs for folks. So if you're sitting next to a chair that you're not saving and it's empty and it's available for our participants here, it'd be great if we could use all the chairs. Otherwise, it's kind of like empty housing units that we have, but we can't count. Okay. Hey, Anthony, can you do the thing you do with that? Yeah. Thank you. Again, Jeff Bradley with Metropolitan Planning Group. Our firm was established back in 2006 by two public sector planners. We now have 52 planners working throughout the Bay Area exclusively for cities and counties within the 9-county Bay Area. I've personally been involved with housing elements since 1999, back in the third cycle, and working on over 36 certified adopted housing elements for our clients. Tonight, obviously, we're going to talk about Atherton. Who here has, this is their first housing element meeting you've been to? So a few, some. Then how many of you have been to several of these meetings? Okay, so we got a good mix. So some of you, you're going to hear things you've heard before, but others will working. Hear it for the first time. So I'm going to go through these first 20, 30 slides pretty quickly, but then we're going to stop and have a Q&A, and then we're going to go through the last section. We really get into the meat of things, and then we'll have a good discussion and Q&A at the end of this. The meeting generally is planned from 6 to 8, but I don't think anyone at the city or the consultant team has a hard stop, so we don't want to cut off any discussion. But we do want to respect everyone's time and keep things moving. So welcome, thank you for coming. We're going to go over high level what the housing element is. We're going to talk about the RHNA, which is an acronym for Regional Housing Needs Allocation. We're going to talk about the local housing needs assessment within your town. And we're going to talk about another acronym, AFFH, which stands for Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing programs to address that. We'll stop there for Q&A. Then we'll transition into site selection for multifamily housing. Like the mayor said, we're not talking about specific sites, but we're talking about the ideas behind that would be used to select possible sites. And then we'll close it up close to eight-ish. I'm going to give you occasional reminders that we have an online survey that's just launched today. So we're going to ask folks to go to this QR code and do that survey. There's about 14 questions. Shouldn't take too long. It's all multiple choice with one fill-in question. If you have a request to do it on paper, we can give you that, but we really prefer to get the electronic versions to not have a data entry project at the end of it. And that'll be hosted by the city's SurveyMonkey account. So you may see occasional email reminders about that. So getting right into it, what the heck is this thing everyone's talking about? The housing element is really an 8-year plan that's mandated by the state of California for every jurisdiction in California, whether you're a city, town, or a county. There's about 400 or 500 of those. And you have to meet affordable housing goals for several income categories, as well as market rate housing. And it's a state mandate, obviously, but it's also meant to address local and regional housing needs. The components of the housing element are performance review of the prior element, which is the time period you see here, 2015 to the end of January 2023. That housing element period ended, and now we're in this next cycle we call the 6th cycle. The regional housing needs allocation is a number that the state gives to ABAG. ABAG breaks it out to the 9 counties and all the cities in the Bay Area. And we'll talk about Atherton's portion of that in a second. The housing needs assessment is a really detailed look at what type of housing is needed within the community. Affirmatively furthering fair housing is a fairly new concept addressing residential patterns of segregation on a racial basis. It's the state version of federal law that's been in place since the Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968. And then obviously we also, since this is a planning document, we always have goals, objectives, policies, and programs to implement the housing plan. So looking at Atherton's 6th cycle housing element, the city council did adopt the plan back on January 31st, which was the actual deadline. They adopted what the council found to be a certified housing element for Atherton. So this is in effect. But then in April, we got a letter from HCD. Obviously, all this stuff is available online, but I like to see the real thing and show it to people to make it tangible and real. And I have a few extra copies in here if anyone wants to read that. And the upshot of HCD's critique, essentially, of the housing element is that it does a good job on paper meeting the different income levels, through an aggressive ADU program, but it misses out on providing multifamily sites to address fair housing, which we'll talk about a little more detail in a second. So as part of this process, we look backwards at what worked, what didn't work, what needs adjustment, what needs wholesale change. So this is an interesting chart because it shows that in the previous housing cycle, what we call the fifth cycle, the RENA was 93, and the city actually built 247 units, which included a combination of 132 new homes and 115 ADUs. And they exceeded the quota, if you will, for the very low income category and the above moderate. What this chart doesn't show, which we would revise if once we resubmit a revised housing element in response to HCD's letter, there's so many, I would use the laser pointer, but it doesn't work on this screen. There are so many very low income ADUs, you can actually count those towards the two other categories. So we'll argue that the town met the income levels at all categories. And that flows from the concept of you can count the very most affordable units in all the other affordable levels above that. That's a little technical, but I wanted there to be some good news at this stage of the process. So getting into the meat of HCD's review and some of our consultant review of what was going on in the fifth cycle, we need to summarize more about the progress of each goal. We need to include a cumulative evaluation of the overall effectiveness in addressing special housing needs populations. That's a technical term. It refers to large households. Households over 5 people, by definition, is a special needs group. Single mothers with children as head of household, that's a special needs population. Unhoused folks is considered special needs. Folks with disabilities, several groups of people that have identified special housing needs within state law need to be pulled out and given more attention in the document. Expand on the needs and methods for outreach to those folks and evaluate ways to really address special needs population. We highlighted that text in this slide to kind of show that pattern. We also need to address the reliance on ADUs, and if necessary, which HCD is telling us it is to provide a multifamily, more multifamily solutions in addition to the school sites that the mayor talked about, in addition to the one non-school site on Oakwood. And also the concept of supporting home improvements to facilitate folks who simply want to age in place in their existing home, but may need some assistance with modifications to make that possible. So again, RHNA stands for Regional Housing Needs Allocation. So the headline here is some of the things we did the last cycle may not work with this new cycle because our RHNA jumped up almost over 370%, 3.7 times bigger than it was before. And HCD also strongly recommends, for a variety of reasons, most of which make sense, and we always strive to come within this range, that the city actually the town in this case, plan for 15 to 30% more than the actual RHNA. I know that sounds drastic. You already have a really big number compared to last time. Why do we have to plan for more? In the interest of keeping this going, someone can ask that as a question. I don't want to get bogged down in RHNA talk right now, but we can address that later. Land use strategies overview. This is right out of the adopted housing element I held up, and it shows simply that the city's relying on ADUs predominantly, some lot splits, which are a new thing now under another new state law called SB 9. Most of you have probably heard of. you can now split your lot regardless of what the town or the city says about minimum lot size and such. That's a valid strategy. There's some vacant sites that should be counted for new housing. That's rational. They're all zoned for housing. The RM10 site, the proposed new RM10 site at 23 Oakwood is good for 16 units. There's the two private schools, Menlo College and Menlo School. On average, they've each identified 2 to 3 sites within each campus. But I think the element conservatively says, okay, 80 units there. And that gets up to the arena with a decent buffer amount. So on paper, it looks good. Turning to the needs assessment. Can everyone see the screen okay? Yeah, it's not too small. Okay, so now we start talking about the housing needs here within the town of Atherton. Population just over 7,000. As this chart shows, the population of Atherton has been flat for quite a while. That's the blue line at the bottom. The population of the county has been going up in a pretty drastic manner, the green line. And then within our region, the line at the very top is going up even faster. So you kind of have this nested situation where regionally population is growing, within our county it's growing a little slower, and within our town is growing slower still. Median age is 47 years old. Obviously, that means half the people are older and half are younger. I calculated that 55% of the folks who live here are over the age of 45, if that means anything. Great percentage of homes are owner occupied, 93%, not surprising. Only 7% are renter occupied. In terms of building types, yes, sir.
These charts are all going to be made available online. So I see a lot of people writing them down or taking pictures of them. You'll be able to get them online tomorrow. Okay, so. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. So obviously, we read the history, some of the history from 1959, a fascinating study done on the study of Atherton, California, an upper class residential community resisting the impact of urbanization. It holds up pretty well, actually, to current times. And so we know that the vision of the town was 1 acre lots, 1 house per lot. There's a guy up here named, I think, Turleton, really strict mayor. Thank you. And if a lot was 1 square inch too small, forget about it. Couldn't do it. So we have 97.9% of all the properties are single family detached homes. And we have 46 single family attached, which I think of as townhomes. And then for multifamily housing, 2 to 4 units, we have less than 0.5%. We have six of those. And we don't have any units with 5 or plus multifamily housing. That's the context we're looking at here. So how does this all relate to affirmatively furthering fair housing? So back in 2019, right before the pandemic, the state of California was concerned about what was happening with fair housing issues at the federal level. And so they rushed and passed this law that said all the local governments in California, specifically when they do their housing element, they have to do this. They requires all the local public agencies to facilitate deliberate action to explicitly address, combat, and relieve disparities resulting from past patterns of segregation to foster more inclusive communities. So the more you research this topic, you'll read a lot of different things about it. But to me, this really represents the core of what it's about. So we've developed some tools to address this with our other clients in Santa Clara County and San Mateo County. Kind of helps make sort of an abstract concept a little more tangible, and involves a lot of mapping. And HCD responds well to mapping. If you show them maps, they like it. And so when they're in their letters, they send you, there'll be lots of requests for more analysis. And picture's worth 1,000 words, right? So we like to give them maps, and that usually gives us a little bit of a better response. So hopefully you guys like maps. Okay, this map's a little hard to look at, but Atherton's obviously that middle chunk that we tried to outline in yellow. It goes above the middle field in El Camino, obviously. Hopefully you guys recognize your town in there. And so that greenish color represents the highest level of white segregation, and the darkest red color represents the highest concentration of people of color. And so these maps are physically showing what communities have the most segregated living patterns, whether it's highly white or highly non-white. And for me, the Bible for this topic is The Color of Law from Mr. Richard Rothstein out of Berkeley, who did a really nice job with it back in 2017. I recommend that for anyone who's interested. Anyone who's interested in this topic. So we look at, when we think about providing housing that addresses segregation issues, we think about access to different things. So it's not just happening in a vacuum. It's like, what's the transit access look like? There should be transit access. So this map simply shows the Samtrans bus stops and the functioning Caltrain station in Menlo Park, but obviously not the one in Atherton, because that one's not being used anymore. Well, but the interesting thing is the interesting thing is that some of Atherton is covered by a reasonable walking distance to the Menlo Park station. So from a planning perspective, that's an important detail. Access to high quality schools is a specific thing we need to think about. And we also think about income levels within this context. These are the well-established income levels used by ABAG and HCD and the federal housing programs. And the most important number on this slide is at the very bottom. The area median income for our county went up from 150,000 last year when we did this slide the first time to 175,000, which is a huge jump one year. So the area median income is just taking off, but I don't think it's going up as much as real estate. So that's essentially the problem. And so this shows you simply at different household sizes up to 4, the chart actually goes up to 8, but we focus usually on just the 4. It shows you the different income levels. When we talk about affordable housing for folks from extremely low to median, those are sort of the affordable housing income categories that we talk about. That's from 0% of the median to 120%. So it's a pretty big range. So to give a little more local color to this, extremely low income person can simply be a senior living alone on a fixed income, or a large family with 1 or 2 incomes. But because of the size of their family, they fall into this extremely low income category. A very low income household could be a single mom with 1 or 2 kids, easily earning a decent salary of $64,000, but still considered a very low income. An elementary school teacher with a postdoc, with 1 child, making over $100,000 a year, most parts of the country would be considered solidly middle class or above. In this area, they're considered low income. A tech worker, stay-at-home spouse making over $200,000, that person's still only moderate income. It's crazy. So based on these median incomes, which is for the whole county, if we break it down by census tract, you see obviously that Atherton is that darker blue color, which is the highest number on the chart. 227,000 to 250. And then there's a level right below that, but it's very consistently within the two highest categories there. In terms of race and ethnicity, 69% white, 21% Asian or American Pacific Islander, Asian Pacific Islander are the two largest racial groups in Atherton, and then there's the big fall off after that with only 5% other race or multiple races, which in a lot of communities is a widely expanding racial category. And we're going to talk about housing access. HCD talks a lot about housing mobility, with the idea that people at all income levels should have some options and some ability to move from this town to that town, or move from this neighborhood to that neighborhood, from a house to an apartment. People should have multiple options. So when you hear about housing access, you can also think about housing mobility. In terms of overcrowding, which is a real tangible fair housing issue and housing problem that faces all communities within Atherton. I think this is within Atherton. We'll double check that. This indicates of those folks suffering from overcrowding, more than one person per room, per house, or housing unit, 21% are other race or multiple races, Hispanic and or non-Hispanic. And then 19% are Hispanic. This is an interesting graphic. It shows that Atherton has a lot of housing stock over the $2 million mark, which is sort of the highest level that ABAG measures. And of those folks who are in a housing unit valued at that higher level, fully 90% are owner occupied, which is not surprising. And then in terms of housing programs to address AFFH, and I promise we're getting to the point we're going to take questions and provide answers, hopefully. So the mayor talked about several of these things, so I don't want to belabor it. But essentially, we're at the end of all this additional analysis we do to address like 90% of HCD's concerns. That last 10% is going to be the hardest. It's going to be if and how we come up with additional multifamily housing sites. So that's the summary of that slide. This is a great graphic. This shows all the land zoned for single-family residential. It's all the red. It's all the red there. So obviously most of the city, but we all knew that. What is this multifamily housing we keep talking about, and why does HCD want it so bad? It's really a broad category. It's obviously not detached single-family homes. We know what that looks like, right? That's 90% of Atherton, one house, one lot. And it doesn't necessarily have to be high-rise or mid-rise apartments that you see in San Francisco or San Jose or Oakland, but it's really all this stuff in the middle, where you have a duplex or you have a fourplex. And a lot of people call it missing middle, which can refer to the income categories, and it can also refer to the type of buildings we're talking about. It could be live-work units, it could be cottage clusters, it could be traditional townhouses or row houses. So it can take a lot of different forms. It can be owner occupied, it could be for rent. I think when ACD talks about multifamily housing within a fair housing context, they're mostly thinking of rental housing. So it's generally more affordable. In terms of what this can look like visually, like I mentioned, it ranges everything from duplex to what's known as skinny houses, triplexes, fourplexes. Some cities like to do a large 10 or 12 unit apartment building, but make it look like one big house. So when I drive around Atherton, I look at some of the houses and think, well, that could be a That could be a 10-unit apartment building, and but just could be designed to look like a nice big house. So we're going to pause there and take question and comments. I believe Rick had a question for me. He's been saving it graciously. You had one slide up there that says target went from 90 to 8. First of all, what is that? Units, overall units, why? So the question is, why did the housing target or the housing quota for the arena go up so much from back in 2015? The city got a target less than 100, right? Like 90, 95 or whatever. And now this time in 2021, we probably learned about that number, 2020. 348. 348 starting this year. Basically, ABAG, they get the number from the state, right? I'm sorry. Thank you. Every time I say an acronym and you don't know, just call me out on it, because my Association of Bay Area Governments. It's the regional government that's made up of volunteers from the councils from all 9 counties in the Bay Area and all 101 cities. And ABAG recently joined with MTC, which is Metropolitan Transportation Commission. So those two, when you hear MTC, think ABAG, and when you hear ABAG, think MTC, because they're the same thing now. Basically, ABAG with money now with the transportation stuff. So basically, the state gave ABAG and MTC a much bigger number than they had ever received before, because of, I guess you could blame the governor, you could blame the legislature that's been passing all these new housing laws, but basically the state kind of looked around and said, we're not building nearly enough housing. We need to goose it up, several million more units than we've been doing over the previous housing cycles. And so everyone across the state got hit with these bigger numbers. Does that help? I think it's more related to employment growth, which can generate population trends. And then it's also related to sort of a historic chronic undersupply of housing related to all the new jobs, which creates all the new people who want to come to California.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for the thoughtful question. Yes, sir, in the back.
So is the essence of all this? Is the essence of all?
It's working. It's working. The short answer is no. That might feel unsatisfying, but we are doing similar work with other jurisdictions that are of somewhat of a similar profile to Atherton. I know Atherton's unique, but we're working with Belvedere, we're working with Monte Sereno. They have similar challenges, right? 99% residential or more, mostly single family, higher income, very expensive properties. None of those cities want to become the next Palo Alto or the other city you said, I can't remember. The scale of it is, when I talk about more multifamily in the community, the scale of it's pretty modest. Like literally, I was telling the city manager, he's getting further and further away over there. Ideally, don't be alarmed. My goal at the end of this process, working with the community, working with the staff, as consultants, we would like to identify 10 or 12 sites that could meet some of these objective criteria for multifamily housing. Right now we have I would argue we have three of those, right? We have Oakwood, we have Menlo School, and we have Menlo College. That's all we really have that's not an ADU, correct, George? Oh, he's got my back now. Excellent. So I'd like, from a professional standpoint, I'd like to be able to identify 10 to 12 sites and then bring that to the council people and let them narrow it down to 5 or 6 sites to do an environmental analysis, work with the community, talk to the property owners, see who's really into it, see who's really not into it. And then ultimately, maybe they have to pick two or three sites ultimately to kind of give HCD permission to check that box that they got Atherton and Armlock and got them to do some multifamily housing to improve the fair housing conditions in this area. And that's what they're doing to all the cities, and we can kind of gauge the level of it. To your point, like how much are we going to change? We can sort of gauge the level of it to really a handful of development sites. Yes, ma'am. And then I'm going to go over to the side. This is the consequences folder. I'm the guy you call when you want to comply with the law, right? So this is what you're hearing, right? You're hearing this like compliance mantra, like, hey, if we do this, they'll give us this. If we do this, we'll do that. If you want to fight them hardcore, you call like you said, a lawyer. Successful fights? Any? Well, this housing element law has been around since 1969. It's the same year I was born. So,
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe I could jump in on this just for a second. So yes, there has. And Southern California is ahead of the Northern California jurisdictions in that fight. There's ballot measures being proposed to make changes to state law, hasn't yet qualified for the ballot. There has been lawsuits from some Southern California jurisdictions. No one to this date has yet been successful to overturn state law. What they have been successful at is maybe trying to mitigate some of their housing element stuff to some degree, nothing dramatic at this point. But we are following those sorts of things, and there's residents out there that are also doing that and providing the town some feedback on that as well. So as that evolves, we're going to stay abreast of that.
Wait. We had someone with their hand up patiently. Like to. Oh, for Frank? Okay.
I'll just shut it out. I think, because we weren't here in January, the negative consequence of failing is called builder's remedy, which means a builder can essentially override the town zoning, and do anything they want to. And that's what we talked about a lot in January. So that's the downside. I thank this gentleman for helping us to bring us into compliance. The politics is the art of the practical. And I'm all in on ADUs. I think maybe we should even work harder to get more ADUs. Because it gives us an opportunity. I believe that there's a lot of people that found it to be more than willing to open up their home to town employees who have to drive a long way to get here, or people who work in Menlo who can't afford to live there, and things like that. And the SB 9 is reasonable if you got enough of a lot to work with. The problem with the multifamily is when you overlay multifamily with low income, it starts to, I think we were talking in January, it starts to become economically practical unless we have a philanthropist that's going to somehow subsidize that. Maybe that would be a solution. Get some rich tech guy to give us a bunch of money to build this stuff, and then we could plot. But other than that, taking multi-million-dollar homes, turning them into even fourplexes, and having one of those units have to be Section 8 type housing. I don't know how we're going to solve it. That's that's we talked a lot about in January. I don't think we were here yet. It was a very productive discussion. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Frank. And
So my question is,
no.
And just one comment, Jeff, before you go on. There's Cristobal running around with a mic here, and this one does work. Just don't press the button. The people outside are listening on the speakers out there. They can't hear the questions or the responses unless you're actually using the mic. So.
No. Sorry. The question was, some of our data is from 2020. Population in California is kind of flattening out. Tech is down. Why aren't the numbers for housing going down? The short answer is because, as I believe Wendy pointed out, laws get made, right? Numbers get picked. And unless there's a new law, those numbers aren't going to change. I'm just going to go over to this side real quick, and then I'll come back to you.
So with all the requirement for low income housing or below market rate housing, is there any state or local or any subsidy for this, or are people supposed to lose money building units? I mean, how does this economically work?
Fair question. One of the benefits of having a certified housing element is it protects you from the builder's remedy that Frank mentioned. Another benefit is that cities become eligible from grants, namely from ABAG, and now that they joined with MTC, ABAG actually has resources and money and programs for this. But there's no sugarcoating the fact that we all read in the newspaper, that the average price of a subsidized, publicly subsidized affordable housing unit is pushing $1 million. And those are just huge, huge numbers. But that in and of itself is not an argument not to plan for multifamily housing. Because if we actually told HCD that we were going to require 100% affordable multifamily housing, they'd say, oh, we know that trick. You just don't want any housing built there at all. Anything over 20% affordable, they consider a constraint on the provision of housing because they're interested in not just affordable housing, right? The RENA is basically 50-50 split, 50% split between affordable housing and market rate housing. So if you come in too strong on the affordable side, they'll tell you, oh no, you're killing the market rate housing market that's functioning in your community. So it's a real delicate balancing act. The main thing is they want sites zoned appropriately so market rate developers can take them down, or 100% affordable nonprofit housing providers can put all their complicated funding mechanisms together and have a basic density that they can work with. So that's sort of a long answer, but the nonprofits,
Yes.
most 100% affordable housing projects have anywhere from like 8 to 12 funding sources. So it's typically the local city or town, a county fund, possibly a Stanford, right? Stanford pays a fee every time they build something that goes into a regional pot that supervisors submitting and set up. They get federal, state. It's the most complicated thing they do is put the funding packages together.
Yeah, I just want to say a couple things. First, to Wendy's question, there are several lawsuits in Southern California, and there's a group of Atherton residents which has retained one of the attorneys that is litigating against the state right now. She's got a couple of different lawsuits going, representing about 30 cities, and those cases are being heard this summer. So we'll know more, and we're actively monitoring that on behalf of Atherton. Question over there is a great one because there is no money, I don't think, and we've offered the town a real estate consultant to prove the fact that to build affordable housing requires massive subsidies. If you rezone something to 20 units per acre on $12 million land, that's $600,000 per unit. You will never get a dime of subsidy grant money because your housing cost, land cost per housing unit has to be closer to $100,000 to even qualify. That money is extremely competitive to get. There's developers all over the state vying for the same money. So I think that what Atherton should focus on is it's 144 housing units of above moderate income. We can do that with single family homes and SB9s. We've really got to focus on ADUs, get 35 per year to get 280. And then focus on the school sites and not set ourselves up to fail by trying to rezone private property that's single family zoning. It will never get built. And then we're going to have to come back and scramble because we're going to have to, Georgia's going to have to report to HCD every year or two that we failed. So why set ourselves up for failure? We should not rezone any private property that's R1A or R1B. We should focus on ADUs and the school sites. Menlo College has a need. We've been working with them. Menlo School has a need. Sacred Heart is a possibility. We don't know that for sure. There's a lot of ways to skin this cat rather than trying to identify 12 multifamily sites that people don't want and will never get built.
Thank you. What's your name? Jeff? You're Jeff? Yes, sir. You've been very patient. Thank you.
And that help? I'll try it. To me, it's bizarre that the state of California can dictate to every community within the state of what its characteristics are by age, by ethnicity, and whatever. As bizarre as if it said you had to be of a certain income group to live in a certain community. And I keep getting the feeling that instead of communities, including us, should be jumping through hoops and back springs to comply with this dictate out of Sacramento, that maybe the town of Atherton or maybe town of Atherton in a partnership with Hillsborough, Woodside, what's the other one that's being hit? Portola Valley, could engage some legal counsel that is sharp to do a little study to see if this law that we are supposed to comply with would pass a constitutional muster.
Thank you. So we're going to take her question and then one more over here, and then we'll move ahead. Maybe you.
I have two questions, and I'll state them both from the beginning. My name's Jennifer, and I'm here as a former 10-year planning commissioner for the town of Atherton and other things that I've done for Atherton. And I first of all, understand that ADUs are no longer going to be acceptable. That's the news I just read, that ADUs will not be allowed to meet the Affordable Housing Care Act.
It sounds like you're referring to the June 2023 grand jury report.
Perhaps,
That's in this binder.
yeah.
I'll stand here and tell you that this, well, they make like 8 or 9 findings, and the first finding is what you said,
Mhm.
like you can't count ADUs as affordable housing. My position and some of the other housing consultants we work with throughout the state believe that's just totally contrary to state law. So we're not taking any direction from that. I hope George agrees
Well, that's,
with that strong,
That's-
with that strong statement. So that's a thing, right? Because it's the civil grand jury, but it's not state law, right?
Right,
So
so
we're gonna follow state law on that issue, like Jeff here recommended.
so thank you. I joined Frank's a colleague, in thanking you for your, and understanding the limitations on the types of questions we're raising. You're trying to problem solve. But my second question is really from the top, which is the state law requires all towns, I think all incorporated towns, to have a general plan. Atherton has a general plan with very specific elements, country-like, minimum 1 acre, except for the grandfathered in lots, which I live on Palmer Lane, and no sidewalks, and on and on. I don't have to go through everybody here is aware of those because they bought here, they live here, they maintain those. And I spent 10 years trying to, problem solve with those. But I do not see how AB 9, and maybe the mayor can answer this, I do not see how that statute is not in direct contradiction or abrogates our general plan elements. It has to. And I'll tell you, I just went over and looked at a lot that was subdivided. My old neighbor, a doctor, sold her house. It was subdivided by a developer. I managed to go in the backyard so the house is okay. He's redone it and he's got it on the market. There is no backyard because he subdivided it. He has basically a concrete patio and then a hot tub. And I was appalled to go behind that subdivision to see a heritage tree that had been cut down. I have pictures of it. And lots of trees. In the county, I live close to the unincorporated county, and the county is also doing this kind of thing. And we're losing I'm concerned about our green canopy, for one thing, which we pride ourselves on. And there's just no way around that if we're going to have, subdivisions all over the place. And I understand that you're not there to answer this question, but it is a very important question. And yes, why has Atherton not legally challenged this? We can certainly file a writ or something. I mean, I'm a former lawyer, so I would believe in challenging that, even if the result is to, as you mentioned, to ameliorate the consequences of the state law. Because by the time, if it were adjudged unconstitutional, it's too late. We've lost our trees. We've subdivided our land. You can't go backward. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Carol. I own 2 properties in Atherton. First of all, a quick response to the litigation issue. There's a group here in Atherton, which Jeff is very involved with, the Atherton Housing Coalition, that for a number of months has been looking at legal challenges and has retained not one but several attorneys. And so the outcome is still to come. There are 2 court cases coming up this summer that are important for us to look at. But believe me, there are a number of residents looking at this already with the intent of doing something. All right. The slides so far, thank you very much, but they're very general. They're very informative. I think people need to know the information. But there's a detailed specific plan below it. And that plan includes more than Oakview, Menlo School, and Menlo College. It includes part of Valparaiso. It includes part of El Camino. And I have heard that you want to expand the number of parcels along El Camino. I think people in this room need to understand the impact of that. I have heard as many as 40 parcels. You can go 2/10 of a mile in from that street, and all those properties will be impacted. So those streets include Selby, Stockbridge, Nora, Adam Way, Almondrell, Tuscaloosa, Austin, and Ralston. If you're anywhere near there, you will be impacted potentially by what happens along El Camino. And there's a block, also along Valparaiso. Menlo College, you mentioned Oakview, Menlo School, Menlo College. Menlo College, they need $40 million to build those housing units by their estimate. So we may or may not have Menlo College. If we don't have Menlo College, that's more units that have to be built. So when you talk about having 10 to 12 sites, you're not talking about individual parcels. You're talking about blocks of streets. Yes. Yes.
Just to be clear, Carol, there is
So-
no council adopted plan that you're talking about.
There's discussion, and that's why we're here tonight. You asked us to come to participate in the discussion.
That's exactly what
Right.
HCD actually requires us to do, is to have community workshops to talk
Right.
about
And
AFFH,
there are
to talk about
proposals
multifamily.
For this.
Whether or not it actually ends up in the plan is a policy call for the
There are
council.
Proposals, and you need to hear the objections from people to the proposals as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Carol. It's 7 o'clock. We're going to take one more short question or comment, hopefully, and then we'll go on to the next stage of this.
Thank you, Jeff, for being here. I actually have three short questions, I think. Number one, I think the questionnaire that you send out or you sent out needs a lot of work. It's sort of a loaded questionnaire. It asks what's wrong with Atherton housing. And I think if you talk to most residents in Atherton, they'd say nothing. So if you could maybe reflect a little bit and maybe we could go back and reformat the questionnaire, I think you would get true answers from the town of Atherton. Right now, I can't respond to it because it doesn't reflect my feelings. So that's number one. Number two, could you talk a little bit about the future compliance and review required by the town? It's my belief, and I think it's been counseled by many attorneys, that at some point, maybe a year, 2 years down the road, the town of Atherton will find itself out of compliance and there will be no way they can comply. So talk about the review process, talk about what happens when we're out of compliance in 2 years and how we go forward. That would be very helpful. And then finally, as an add, if at some point it might be helpful to understand why our overage in the last housing cycle didn't credit towards the current housing cycle.
Thank you. What's your name? Rod. Thank you, Rod. 3 questions. The first one was the survey needed some of we did always try to add a none of the above for people who just didn't find themselves represented in some of the answers, but I accept your input. We'll take another look at it with city staff. Second question was review. So state law does have these compliance check-ins every 2-4 years, generally a halfway point for what's known as SB 35. You may have heard of the big project in Cupertino at the Velco Shopping Center that evolved into an SB 35 project, where it sort of functions as a builder's remedy project at that point, where developer comes in, says, you're out of compliance, you're on the list. You have to approve my project in 90 days or 180 days based on only objective black and white criteria or rules within the zoning code and the general plan. So it kind of puts the city on the spot to approve it. So that's a real thing. And then in terms of the overproduction not flowing through into the new cycle, I don't have a real specific answer about that, but I also know one of the benefits of having an adopted certified housing element, if you do underproduce, like most cities have done historically, that doesn't roll over into the next housing element cycle. So generally, each cycle, if you have an adopted housing element, is a fresh start. Either whether you overproduced or underproduced, you start from zero every time we have a new housing cycle. So to my mind, it's kind of consistent that way. Is that helpful?
Yeah, but I think there's the review that just says 35. I think it's housing. Once we're found non-compliant.
Oh, I'm assuming okay, I started from a different point. I'm assuming we work through this together, we get compliance, and then we're out of compliance on a production standpoint. If we're out of compliance on a not having a housing element standpoint, then that's where you get all the builder's remedy ramifications. You get the attorney general possibly wanting to make a poster child out of you or some other city. You could have lawsuits from developers, you have lawsuits from housing advocacy groups. There'd be a lot of lawyer action, basically. And lots of local land use control, even more than what we're talking about right now. But wait. Have it go in the kitchen. Okay, thanks for the tip. Okay, so that concludes this question and comment period. Thank you for everyone who asked questions and made comments. Hope anyone who didn't get a chance to speak, including you folks outside, get a chance at the end here. So we're going to talk about site selection for multifamily housing. And to Carol's point, when I talk about a site, a housing site, I'm talking about a parcel, a piece of land with a parcel number and an address, just one. Sometimes well, not tonight, but maybe in the future, we might talk about a portion of a parcel. Like the classic example is an older shopping center built in the 1950s, low floor area ratio, small building, lots of parking. We could talk about keeping the retail part and adding housing in the parking lot or over a new retail. Anyway, you can tell I'm putting you guys to sleep here. Okay, so when we talk about housing site selection criteria, we know the council kind of went down a road, so talking about criteria that the council would use to judge housing sites. Everything you see on the screen here is nothing that we came up with. This is not my professional opinion. This is not the council's opinion. This is actually right out of state law. So we're going to follow state law. The first hurdle, before you even think about anything else, the site must be vacant or underutilized. If it's not vacant or underutilized, then Jeff's argument holds the day, right? No one's going to buy a $12 million house and tear it down to build a $11 million condo building, right? It just doesn't make any sense. It has to be a good candidate site. It has to be likely to develop for housing in the next 8 years, which in a real estate term is not like a huge amount of time. It could take a year or two to get planning approvals, a year or two to get building plans all situated, a year or two to get through public works. Before you know it, these projects take time. So anyway, it must be vacant or underutilized. Underutilized, vacant, I think we all know what that means, right? It's just like dirt. Underutilized means you might have a property that has a smaller, older home. Maybe it's vacant. Maybe the house is vacant. Maybe it's boarded up. That'd be the classic underutilized site. Not vacant, technically. It has a water line, sewer line, full utilities, has a structure there. Used to be a house, but now it's vacant, and obviously someone's going to come in there and do something with it. So that rules out like most sites in Atherton, quite frankly. So that's like an important concept. And then below that, another threshold concept is size. Can't be too big and it can't be too small. And again, this is all based on state law. This is nothing that we've made up. And state law says it needs to be between a half acre and 10 acres based on however they came up with that. If you ask them, they'll say, well, we talked to a lot of affordable housing developers, and that's where most affordable housing projects take place. Our local research for Menlo Park found that most affordable housing developers are looking for 1 to 2 acres. That's their sweet spot. Anything less than 1 acre is too small. Anything more than 2 acres is too big, too expensive. And so that's an important thing to keep in mind. In terms of locational criteria that we talked about with the maps and fair housing is it needs to be proximate to public transit. And when we say near or proximate, we're really talking about a 10, 15-minute walk, half mile, 3/4 mile, depending on how fast you walk, generally walking distance. She don't like that. Well, there's hills, right? And so again, this is right out of the statute, access to high-performing schools and jobs, access to amenities such as parks and services, and access to healthcare and food, grocery stores. We've all heard of food deserts, places where there's not enough grocery stores. So the housing is meant to be in a good location where people would want to live and have good services. Because some cities in the past, not Atherton, but other cities, they'll say, oh, affordable housing, we put that over here by the train tracks and the warehouses. And there's just nothing around there. And so this is the land use map for Atherton. It simply shows the distribution of the streets, the single-family homes, the public school facilities, the reservoir in green, some of the parks. And so from a housing perspective, we know the community is sensitive about traffic. And you have a street system where a lot of the streets don't go through, but some of them do. But from a traffic perspective, and to meet the fair housing rules, most of the transit, setting aside Caltrain for a minute, but most of the bus transit runs on your collector roads and your arterial roads, which are green and blue on this map. And so if the housing could be placed along some of those routes, not along dozens of properties, but just discrete locations that's well served by transit, but would also keep any cars related to that development approximate to a road that is designed to take traffic through and out of the community where people need to go. And that's also where you find most of your not your separated, but your painted bike lanes and such.
Jeff, before you move that slide, looking at those transit routes that are on our circulation element, one of the key concerns here is that only one or two of those actually carry bus transit that's not school-related bus transit. So Valparaiso and a few other streets, those bus lines are only school transit, so they only operate 8 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and in the summertime they don't operate. Those wouldn't be good circulation corridors for housing. It would be along the major ones like Middlefield or El Camino Real.
Yes, absolutely. Agreed. If we're not looking for just limited school bus routes, George raises a very good point. And that's why we want to have these kind of meetings before we get into recommending any particular parcels. Susan, Carol? Sorry, you're sitting right under my screen, so I keep looking at you. So these things on the screen here, they all exist right now in some form or another. Again, this is nothing we've made up. The first one is in your adopted housing element that the council adopted back in January. The city is going to create an ordinance. They're going to require 20% affordable housing, which is a big step forward for any community that adopts that for the first time, because it means very simply that anytime someone develops a market rate housing project, we know how for-profit developers operate, right? They're good at finding parcels and working with property owners and getting the financing and making it work. They'll have to provide 20% of the units for affordable. So that can become a steady trickle of affordable units to the extent that market rate housing is happening in the community. As part of that, the city will adopt an affordable housing fee on all the new houses built. That'll help fund new affordable housing opportunities. Could include maybe helping with ADUs, incentivizing. There'll be an opt-out provision according to the document that says if you're building a new house and you do build an ADU as part of it, you don't have to pay the fee because you've already provided a potentially affordable, a deed restricted affordable unit will allow you to fee out of it. Not fee out of it. You'll provide the ADU unit in lieu of paying the fee. So it's a pretty sophisticated program. I think it works well with the context we have here with so many large home sites. State density bonus law is just something that exists at the state level for a long time. But it's just a full disclosure thing. So when we talk about 10 units per acre or 20 units per acre, you have to be aware that that state density bonus applies to that. And the state density bonuses generally range from 35 to 50%. So it can increase the densities as the level of affordability goes up. That's been in place for a long time, but I don't want people to be surprised about it. SB 9 we talked about. SB 10 is another similar law to SB 9, but it allows for cities to proactively pick a number of parcels and say, we're going to allow up to 10 units on these parcels, as long as it's either along a transit line or within an urbanized area. And I do believe we meet both of those definitions. And so it's a strategy to think about. From the community's perspective, it might not feel that much different, for example, than the RM10 zoning that was adopted in the housing element for that site. It sort of ignores density to some extent and comes in at 10 units per acre. But since we have so many 1 acre parcels here, that almost feels like 10 units per acre. But it's a slightly different way to get there. And it could provide a smoother path for some of those projects to get approved. Another option that a lot of cities consider is a multifamily overlay zoning, which you could create within the zoning district as a tool that just kind of sits there in the zoning code. But if you did have a property owner who was interested in doing affordable housing, they could request that overlay to come down on their property because it already exists as a concept within the zoning code. And then it becomes more like an ADU or an SB 9 where it's the property owner kind of selecting themselves instead of the city saying, you know, these sites are going to be multifamily. The traditional approach would be to simply rezone sites to multifamily based on those criteria we talked about. But obviously there's challenges with that we've heard about tonight. And then finally, we are working with some cities that are very interested in the SB 10 program. They like the fact that it's limited to 10 units, that there's clear guidance in how to implement that. And we do have some indications that HCD would accept that, even if the density is below the typical 20 units per acre, which is the density that's usually identified as being acceptable for these kinds of requirements for multifamily housing. So sorry, I know I'm throwing a lot at you here, but that brings us to our next stage where we open it up for more discussions and comments. It's only 7:20. So I'd like to hear from folks who haven't talked yet.
My name's David, and it strikes me as interesting that they have mandated this town by town, but ABAG is a regional regulatory scheme. Why can't towns act together? By the way, you should name this project after Franz Kafka.
Franz Kafka. Is Kafka-esque this is feeling? There is some teamwork happening within San Mateo County on this issue. It's called 21 Elements, which has been longstanding the last 2 or 3 housing cycles. I think the county and all the cities banded together to have a lot of joint meetings and joint work products leading up to this process where, like, for example, actually that was an ABAG project to do a rent survey for ADUs, but some of the housing conditions were done on a joint level within 21 Elements. And then there is also a mechanism within the law where cities can horse trade and negotiate amongst themselves. For example, City of San Jose is taking a large chunk of RENA allocation from Santa Clara County, right? Santa Clara County considers itself a rural enterprise, providing open space between the 13 cities in Santa Clara County. They don't consider themselves in the housing land use business. And so they really push all the development into the cities. And so that's flowing into their process. But I don't think anything equivalent.
So we do have the ability, or at least we did have the ability, the last cycle, to form a subregion. And I think that was done during the last cycle of the housing element. This cycle of the housing element, CCAG came together with all the jurisdictions and looked at forming a subregion, which is exactly what you're talking about, the opportunity to trade or swap housing units. And because the allocations were so huge, none of the jurisdictions wanted to form a subregion.
I don't need that. I'm a teacher. I can command a room.
The people outside can't hear you.
I have a question. It's kind of a paradox that the city is involved in. I just got notice. I live on Stockbridge. I've been there for over 40 years. My husband's family was on Selby since 1945. So I've been around for a while. So is the family. I just got a notice that somebody wants to cut a tree down behind me on Adam Way. And yet we could cut trees down and have to have permission and have to get the whole neighborhood involved. And yet somebody next door can build an ADU right on top of my property, have how many people living in that ADU? Where are the regulations for that? When you talk about low income housing, many times it's multi-generational and there could be 15 people in that ADU right next to my property, but I can't cut a tree down. It just doesn't make sense.
So we've been here about 15 years and I'm kind of an old fashioned California girl, 6th generation. Meant a lot to my family to come here from Germany and come up the hard way. And every generation, works hard for the next generation. So, I follow suit with my family. I work hard. I go to school. I save my money. You go through ups and downs in life. We finally get a chance to save enough money to buy a home here. So we do. $1,000 a month. I'm out there trying to replace broken down fences, crummy old landscaping, my hands in the dirt. I'm sure a lot of you feel this way about your homes. Okay, you get very attached to your property and you work really hard. So it's an old house, it's over 70 years old. It's not built to be a long-standing house. It's got cracks in the walls. You have contractors in over the years and you say, what can I do about the cracks in the walls? And contractor after contractor after contractor tells you, you can't do anything about the cracks in the walls. All you can do is rebuild because you can't meet today's regulatory restrictions by just fixing what you've got. You have no choice. So you're up to your eyebrows in debt, right? Because you're just trying to make your way in a nice town that used to be like California used to be, quiet. People respect each other's property. Okay. So you work hard, you save some more, you think, okay, maybe I'll get a chance to rebuild. And you do. And it takes years. And the regulations are incredible. Now, I've built homes a few times before in California, and it's never been like this. It is unbelievable. So an old friend in Sacramento, where I grew up, said, who's a developer, It's a misnomer to call development in Sacramento or anywhere in California where it could be affordable, because the regulatory environment is so bad. You can't build anything affordable here. But nobody addresses that. So I'm coming at this from a personal point of view, because I'm certainly not going to be able to solve all the political agendas that are going on here. But I want to tell you, I put my heart and soul into rebuilding into a nice town and a small piece of property. It's less than an acre, on my hands and knees and the sweat of my brow. And I tell you, it is not fun. There's not been one day when this has been a rewarding dream project. You get started, you have to finish it. The expenses are out of sight, especially during COVID. And the regulations, you can't touch a tree. You have to put in a new water system just to preserve your existing landscaping. It has to be all fenced off. And then the arborist comes through and says, even though you're using the best landscaper in this area, who's very well regarded to do this correctly, we're not satisfied and you have to do it over. And then we want an arborist report every month to be sure you're not a bad guy. We want to be sure you're taking care of your trees. Well, you think I'm not going to take care of my trees? I don't believe in sustainability for my state and my lot and the house I want to rebuild again. Okay, so the setbacks, you can't build bigger because the setback requirements here are huge. You can go up and you can go down. You can't build an ADU above the garage, at least not when we put our permit through. I wanted to. I begged our architect to try to do it. Sorry, no, the limit is 15 feet. Good luck. Well, it'd be nice if we could rent it to a student or something. No, you can't pass an ADU that way. You have to do an ADU a different way. So we can't have a separate building for an ADU because our property is too small. I want to tell you, I don't think you guys have any concept of what you're doing to individual homeowners and property owners who live here. And it's not just Atherton, it's everywhere in California, everywhere. It's Sacramento, it's Southern California, it's Redwood City. It's not just the A-bag area, which I know has been around a long time because I used to sell municipal bonds 35 years ago for A-bag. So I get it, but the overreach on the state's part has gone beyond. The Wall Street Journal this morning reported that the population in San Francisco is down 7%. So I know your figures here aren't reflecting what's going on in this area. You know, I know I'm emotional about this. I know a lot of you would be emotional about this, and most people here have been very polite about it. And it's not personal. You're just trying to do your job, and you're just trying to do your job. But my God, when are people going to understand how this is affecting people here? Do you know how many people have left California? Major producers of people who make jobs here. And nobody seems to be caring about that at all. You don't get it. You don't get it. When you build these multifamily housing units in, you think it's one lot or just two lots, right? Where are people parking? Do you have setbacks that are required to be 40 or 50 feet for them like you have required for us? Are they going to be allowed to cut down the trees like we weren't allowed to touch ours and I had to pay to put in a sprinkling system in twice? And the first one was perfectly good. And you just don't have any concept. There is no empathy. There is no acknowledgement of property rights. We're not saying we don't support low cost, low income family. I'm all for it. But the regulatory environment here doesn't support it. Heck, I can hardly afford to build what I'm boarding here. I'm up to my neck in trying to get this project done. But why on earth should I stay? My kids don't even want to come back here. It's too damn expensive in this state.
By the way, if you had these rules in place, here's she runs the state.
I would not build again. I wouldn't build again in this town either. And this town was near and dear to me. I mean, honestly, this is so narrow. Developers who get really low cost loans build these, and what do they do when they're built? They sell them. And who do you think buys them? Their property. And then what happens to that property? And in 30 years, we've got a whole slew of really run-down buildings all along Alpena or along the same.
Okay,
Anybody?
no. Can we give someone else a chance? Anyone outside want to chime in? No?
Jeff, as you're looking for the next speaker, just a couple of comments. One is, there was a comment earlier about a general plan, and the town has its general plan. One of the caveats that's left off that, which I think as a planning commissioner, you may have been familiar with, is our general plan has to be compliant with state law. And that's part of its adoption. So regardless of whether it says we're a rural community or not a rural community, those sorts of things, it still has to comply in all of its elements with state law. The ADUs that were talked about that are right up against the property line, those 4-foot setback ADUs, that's state law, that's not local law. We're actually trying to develop ordinances and to relax some things with respect to trees. That will encourage property owners who are building ADUs to comply with our 10-foot setback requirement. That's part of what we're trying to adopt as our ADU ordinance moves through the process. That's a state law, not a local law. And it's based on bathrooms and things like that, but it's not regulated locally. So the heritage tree issue is one that we're also taking back to the council to try and relax some of those standards with respect to development. If it's an ADU that's the minimum size of state law, the 800 square foot ADU or less, 4-foot setback, no local law can be imposed to prevent that ADU from being put on that property where they want to put it. Because it just states. We are. And then the arborist report is another one that we're also looking at relaxing the requirement for that. That went through the planning commission. It was supposedly supposed to be put on there as a temporary monthly report. I think we're going to be pulling that back. I think Carol knows a little bit about some of those ongoing conversations. Yeah. We actually spend $10,000 a year of your money to regulate and inspect the red-legged frog up on Walsh Road from years and years ago. We're still doing those inspections because of state law. The grand jury doesn't have regulatory power over local agencies. Why don't we turn it back to Jeff Bradley, who can look for any more comments with the mic?
One of the things that you've got a binder there with that April letter from HCD. If you read the April letter, there are 53 different analysis that HCD wants. And I think that before we even talk about any other multifamily sites, you need to do those 53 analysis, submit them to HCD and see if they're even being reasonable. They may not accept any of them, or maybe they'll accept half of them. But why should we as a community go through more of this multifamily, trying to search for sites that don't exist and will never get built when we don't even know what you're going to produce and what will be acceptable to HCD? It seems to me that we should do this sequentially. Turn in your updated letter to HCD and see how many of those 53 analysis they'll accept.
One of the things that I think you need to recognize too, and keep in mind when the next time you vote, you don't like what Sacramento's doing for us? Well, our representative in the Assembly and the Senate voted for all these laws. So keep that in mind and make a good choice when you're voting for assemblyman as well as the senator.
I got a fresh one back here.
It's just down the street.
So multifamily sites, you're looking to identify these, right? 10 or 12? So 23 Oakwood's the only one you got identified now. So you had a slide up with state law criteria, and it seems like Oakwood doesn't really fit those. Can you go back to that slide?
Sure.
Dawn. Alberta. You guys want 16, 18 units up against your fence?
Well, just to elaborate on that one, 23 Oakwood was already added to the housing element. It doesn't, you're right, it doesn't meet those criteria, but it's in the current housing element. It's something that's already been submitted to the state.
Yeah. So why did you guys submit something that isn't really compliant with the state guidelines? I mean, it's not vacant, it's not underutilized. It's not really, it's not on an artery. I mean, no. I know, so the site you got is not a good one. Anyway, it just goes to what Jeff's talking about. It's, you guys shouldn't be doing private property. Should figure something else out.
Thank you.
First of all, I want to say I agree with the premise that the California legislature is out of control on almost everything that they do. But as the city manager just pointed out, or I guess the mayor just pointed out, we're the ones who voted these people in. Okay, you didn't, but somebody did, and they've been running amok on all kinds of things for a lot of time. Our city council has to try to bring us into compliance with state law because that's mandatory. If we're not in compliance with state law, the builders can come in and do anything they want to. They can completely override local zoning. That's what the builder's remedy is called. And I think it's great that, I can't remember your name, you've retained attorneys or are talking to attorneys to possibly challenge this. I've been a lawyer for 45 years. I'm thinking about how many Republican governors we've had in the last 25 years, how many Republican judges are there who might actually overturn this law because of a taking. I'm just saying, let's not hold our breath. I mean, I applaud the effort. I think it's a good thing to do. I'm just saying, in the meantime, we've got to try to be in compliance with the law or else face the consequences. And I appreciate, again, Jeff coming and spending the time with us. I did have one quarrel with one of your points. We spent 3 hours in January talking about an overlay zone. And I don't think there was a person in the room that thought it was a good idea, either on El Camino or Valparaiso. And the city council unanimously, I think it was unanimous, said no. So I'm disappointed that overlay zone is back in the mix, and hopefully it's not actually back in the mix. I think your more fine-tuned approach of trying to find those parcels, and God willing, you can find them, to bring us in compliance. And it doesn't mean the city council has to go that way, but I appreciate that you're doing your job and presenting them with the options that they need to make good decisions. And I think that's why we're all here, to give you guys feedback on what would be a good decision or not. And I appreciate your effort.
Rick,
Does this work now? Okay. When you say, oh,
okay, sorry, Rick, let me address that issue that Frank raised, because I could see the confusion I've created. So overlay is a thing that exists strictly in the zoning code, right? Like you guys have R1A and R1B zoning, and that controls what you can do for your property, and you read about it in the zoning code. The overlay I'm talking about would only exist in the zoning code. It wouldn't exist on any property out there. It's not on the map, correct? But if a self-motivated property owner said, hey, I have a property, I don't want to do an SB9 lot split, I don't want to build one big house, I want to do like a 10-unit project, let's just use that for discussion purposes, they could request that overlay be placed on their property.
But Jeff, you were only suggesting that as a tool that the council could consider as it talks about options.
Correct. But it doesn't necessarily have to be tied to any specific property at this stage. It would show good faith with HCD that we're creating tools that can be used in the future.
We're going to put multifamily housing it's going to decrease value of the property taxes go down to the city of on that property values go down. That's property tax. That's one issue. Another one is there's gonna be increased traffic. There's more parking. In my particular neighborhood, talking about Norway, that's, Stockbridge, it's Almond Grove. And, this particular area, we have a fire station on Almond Grove. And, if we have more traffic, trying to get out of Almond Grove, that's gonna slow down. Another issue is, our recreational enjoyment is diminished. And that's, we have this great bike trail that goes on Austin Avenue. People use Adam Way, Norway, Allenbrook as a loop to go around. We have a 95-year-old woman who's just a walker. She goes 5 loops around Allenbrook, Adam, and Norway. And she's out there in the middle of the street.
Thank you. Rick, could you hand the microphone to the gentleman in the back?
Thank you. Yeah, just had a question regarding your comment about cities being able to trade their quotas in Santa Clara County. Is that an option in San Mateo County, for example, city of Atherton trading their quotas with other cities?
I don't know if there was a time limited factor on that.
There was. We had to determine a sub-region decision with CCAG early on in the process, and the other jurisdictions did not want to participate.
Okay.
California, I'm sorry, Council of Governments,
Oh,
the local COG.
oh.
They're trying actively right now to get signatures before I think August to get a ballot measure on the state ballot to overthrow it. That's exactly what they're saying. So when is it telling you that? Well, that's what your job is about leaders. I don't think.
The jurisdiction, local government can't lobby at the local level. So we can't do that. And that's exactly what the council member's doing, but we still need to run a tandem process. I believe. Coun-
Unfortunately, many of us, we are residents, don't like walking around and turning plaques, marching. They're very private, very. And
I think Rick's talking about actual town purchasing a property in Redwood City and using it to meet our housing element numbers. The way the state law works, if it happens in Redwood City gets the credit for that.
Could annex it, George.
I'm on the city council also. Two comments. Number one, there has been a huge focus, not just in Atherton from our staff and from our city council, but from the staff in every city in California and every city council, because the pressure in this housing cycle to achieve 375% of the houses that we attempted to achieve in the last housing cycle applies to every city and every county in California. There is a benefit that we have, notwithstanding that this whole thing is really horrendous, and that is that San Diego County is 2 years ahead of us, and Los Angeles and Orange County, which are treated together, are a little more than a year and a half ahead of us. So we get to see what happens with them. That's a great benefit for us. San Diego County, which they were due to have their housing element certified on March 31st, 2021. So it's more than 2 years. There's some, I haven't looked at the numbers recently, but it's about 30% of the jurisdictions still aren't qualified. And in Los Angeles County, they were obligated to be qualified October 15th, 2021. They got a 1-year delay until October 15th, 2022. So this is about a year, a little more than a year and a half since their original date. And more than 50% of those jurisdictions, I think there's 124 jurisdictions in those two counties, more than 50% are not yet qualified. So we get to see what happens with them. So this is a marathon. This isn't a sprint. We've got a lot of time to figure out what to do. We are absolutely committed to complying. And we do hope that the definition of what complying is changes. And you know, I mean, many of us are involved in supporting this catalyst activity, but it's not something that we promote from the city council because it's not something we can promote from the city council. Just a second. There are two other comments. One, everybody's focused on complying with these state regulations, which are extremely onerous. I stepped back and said, rather than focusing on complying with the state regulations, what are the housing requirements that we really need in Atherton as a community, as who we are? And there's real value to looking at the issue of affordable housing, because we need affordable housing. We have 1,000 people that work in the 8 schools in our town. And none of those people can live in this town. Many of them have to, okay, there might be one or two who date back in Atherton for 40 some years, but it's extremely unusual. And we all know that. And we've all had kids that have gone through the schools, and we know almost, I mean, none of the teachers that my kids had lived in Atherton. Most of them had to drive more than an hour to get to work. So there's a great need for affordable housing to enable those folks to live near. And also the people that work on our properties and work in our town, they can't live here. So how do we get to affordable housing? That's the real question, not how do we comply with the state. And the only way we can get to affordable housing in this town is two ways. Number one, you can't transfer property. If you transfer property at $10 to $12 million an acre, I don't care what your percentage is, at 20%, you can't build affordable housing. You just can't build affordable housing if you're transferring property. And there is two kinds of housing that can be built without transferring housing. One is ADUs. What was written in the Almanac focused on the grand jury, but it interpreted what the grand jury said and said ADUs are not going to be allowed from communities like Atherton, Woodside, and Portola Valley. That's not true. What that grand jury actually said is you have to have robust programs that monitor ADUs in order to validly claim that they're being rented for low income or very low income people. Okay, it's fine. So we need to build a really robust program. And we have a benefit in this town, which is many of us are affluent. We can build an ADU and we can rent it at an affordable rate. And I'm willing to do that to keep apartment buildings being built from down my block. But so one place we can provide affordable housing is with ADUs. The other place we can provide affordable housing is we can rezone and authorize the schools to build multifamily housing. And we're doing that. We've authorized Menlo College to build a 4-story apartment building to provide housing, which they absolutely desperately need. Every school in this town needs that. The public schools don't have that kind of housing. What George referred to is there is a parcel of land at Selby School, which is on the backside of Selby School. That's about an acre parcel that is not in Atherton, it's in San Mateo County, but we can seek to annex that. It's not going to apply for this housing cycle, but it could apply for the next housing cycle. And it's a great site to promote affordable housing on. So I think there are some options for us to meet the need that we have. Whether that ultimately complies with the state and the requirements of the state, I don't know. I'm committed to complying with the state and to working with the state to redefine for them why we can't build affordable housing in a multifamily context in this town. The property is just too expensive.
I just want you to follow up really quickly. Just
On what?
about what would happen if we don't get an approved plan. The worst case scenario is if a year and a half, 2 years
Well,
from now, we don't.
Well, number one, a year and a half or 2 years from now is past the 2024 election. So we're going to be able to see what happens in the 2024 election and with the initiative that comes forward in that election. I mean, the biggest threat to date has been the builder's remedy, which says that a builder can build without regard to local land use requirements. But they have to build 20% affordable. And the problem is, okay, so let's see, is somebody really going to buy a property in Atherton and come in and build a 30-unit apartment building in Atherton? I mean, there's the builder's remedy. They could do it legally, but we haven't seen it happen yet. Now, it did happen in Los Altos Hills. So there's a threat. It's a valid threat, and it's something we're concerned about and we're not ignoring. But they've got to build something that's affordable. And I don't believe that you can build something that's got 20% affordability in an Atherton if you're buying the land. There are additional threats in terms of penalties that the town could have to pay at the rate of, I think it's $100,000 a month. And the state could take over our zoning, which they could allow anything they want. But the reality is, we're watching what's happening in San Diego and Los Angeles counties, and they're way ahead of us. And these things haven't happened to them yet. So now that's not to say they're not getting sued by housing advocacy organizations, which is happening and which could happen to us. And it's not something that we want to see. That's why we're working with HCD, and this takes an enormous amount of time. I mean, this is a really complex issue, and it's easy to say we should just fight it. I'd love to see us fight it, but fighting it means there has to be a state initiative, which is not going to, we're not going to be able to do anything in relationship to it in terms of a vote until November 24. That's the earliest we could see a real change in the housing law.
And just to give you an update on those Southern California jurisdictions.
Yeah.
In San Diego County, 13 of 19 are now in compliance. In Orange County, 18 of 35 are now in compliance. And in LA County, 46 of 89 are now in compliance.
So LA and Orange County are about 50%. And so much to target from the wealth perspective. And they're not, and that's not looking at what every single one of us in this room probably have done, which is we've spent everything we've got to do. And it takes a lot to protect those property. Everybody knows it's not right, but
Yeah.
they don't care. And so from a council perspective, we haven't pursued that strategy because we don't.
Okay, so we were supposed to be done by 8 o'clock, and so I'd like to move back to where you are in the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Whitman, members of the council for your comments. Really just want to encourage people to fill out the survey. We'll take a look at it, see if there's any improvements we can make. Thank you for coming out tonight. Yes, Rod?
So I really appreciate you being here. I know it's a tough job because we've been working on this for about a year. I think this is the first time we've had the ability to talk with you directly, and we've had lots of conversations with the city manager and some of the council folks, but it's nice to actually be able to give you feedback. And so I'd like to give you a little more feedback. And I think you heard the gist of it from this group. But one is the residents of Atherton are very satisfied with their housing in their town right now. and would like you to support that in a way that you can. But as you've all seen us do, work toward solutions to see if we can find a way to comply. So the long-term approach for the M group, I would hope, would be to take a look at sort of that premise that we're satisfied with it and address how you've gone about evaluating the requests of the state versus that premise. And I don't think the housing element currently does that. I don't think you actually address that we have 2,200 private lots. You've basically communicated with all 2,200 people in the town of Atherton, and nobody wants to change their zoning except maybe one lot to high density zoning. And I think that needs to be well documented, because at some point we may be out of compliance. And if we are, we need to have the evidence in the record that you guys have gone in, not trying to convince HCD to necessarily buy it, but to show them that you've actually done the work and evaluated affirmative, AFFH concepts. But I think most of your approach has been using the vernacular to satisfy the state as opposed to satisfy the residents. And I'd like you to really think about finding a way to communicate what we want. So that's my final sort of comment. I really appreciate you listening to that.
Happy to let you have the last word. I think it was very well spoken, and we try to do that in all of our work, is represent the community and advance their goals in the face of strong pressure coming from outside. So we get it, and we're here to help. And don't forget to fill out the survey. Thank you. It's online, it's digital. I'll get you a paper copy if you prefer that.